This is NEGOTIATEx podcast, show number 105. Hello and welcome to the NEGOTIATEx podcast. I'm your co-host, co-founder, Nolan Martin. And with me is Jolly St. Nick. Aram Denisian, our partner in crime. I'm here to introduce our guest. How's it going, Aram?
Hey, I'm enjoying the holiday season here, Nolan. You look like you're enjoying it Florida style. Yep. No Christmas hat, no Christmas garb. What's going on?
I'm getting ready to actually take out the jet skis in December, so well worth it.
I'm not jealous. I will take snow this time of year anytime. Well, let me introduce our guest. And for folks that are joining us, you'll notice the little holiday spirit we've got going on if you're joining us by YouTube. Our guest today is Lenn Millbower, a former Disney training leader, big picture thinker, adult learning expert, 5-time published author, keynote speaker, and workshop facilitator. Lenn is also the founder and president at Offbeat Training, LLC, an organization that specializes in teaching Disney-inspired methodology so business professionals can make their own magic. Lenn has one of the most unique backgrounds of anyone we've ever had on this podcast. And Lenn, that is saying quite a bit. Lenn has worked as a professional magician and musician who performed extensively throughout the United States, Canada, and on cruise ships. He received his Bachelor of Music in Composition from Berklee College of Music and a Master's in Human Resource Development from Webster University. Prior to founding Offbeat Training, Lenn was a training leader at Disney World Learning Solutions, where he managed the team that wrote and documented all operational employee training. In recognition of his work on the opening team of Disney's Animal Kingdom, Lenn received Disney's highest internal recognition award, Partners in Excellence. Over the past 30 years, Lenn has worked extensively in training and education, instructional design, customer service, leadership, innovation, and presentation skills with a variety of organizations. Clients include healthcare, governmental, military, supermarket, insurance industry organizations. His lauded learner-focused strategies give him a real-world perspective on the relevant application of brain-based adult learning methodologies. Lenn's engaging, interactive, and enjoyable entertainment-based training approach energizes participants while fully demonstrating the effectiveness of his techniques in real-world applications. Lenn focuses on practical steps that participants can immediately apply. The results speak volumes. One client increased profits by 50% per day, while another client improved its patient satisfaction scores by over 15%. His most recent book, The Santa System, 10 Leadership Lessons from the North Pole, was released in November and is an analogy, both fun and very serious, about the business of achieving organizational results through people. In it, Lenn visits Santa's workshop and shares what leaders can learn from Santa's unprecedented and unmatched success. Lenn, happy holidays. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Merry Christmas, happy holidays. I'm glad to be here. I put my eggnog aside for a minute and talk to you guys.
I did the same thing with my mulled wine.
Well, Lenn, as you reflect on your professional journey, what key people or moments most significantly impacted how you think about organizational success today?
I have to confess, I did not seek to be where I am now. It all happened to me. I don't know whether you call it God or Kismet or whatever it is, but my job has been to open the doors that are placed in front of me. My entire life, I've had people saying to me, yeah, you're creative, you should do this, and offering me an opportunity. I started out with Doris Yeager. She was the director of a children's variety entertainment troupe in upstate New York. And I was a magician for her and ended up being her musical director. I went to, as you said, Berklee College of Music. Then all that time on the cruise ship with various bands, and eventually ended up at Disney. And frankly, the leadership I experienced at the Mouse is somewhat reflected in the Santa System analogy. Two people that come to mind, Mark Potter, he was my manager when we were opening Disney's Animal Kingdom. And the amazing thing about Mark is he managed everybody differently, each according to their needs. And he was such an effective manager. Another one was Sharon Medill, and she was a former Mary Poppins, and boy, it showed. Everything Sharon touched was practically perfect. The interesting thing is the Disney organization is one that says, I want you to do this. You say, I don't know anything about that. They say, that's okay, you'll learn. That didn't happen to me. What happened to me instead was, you've got a unique talent. We're going to do this with you. And so I kept getting these plush assignments that fit my skill set. Two of the major things were orientation programs, character training. I actually got to write the Disney, Mickey Mouse and the gang, got to write the character training program 3 or 4 different times. I'll close this out by saying my most interesting time is in the morning, I'm working with the Snow Whites. In the afternoon, I'm working with the Pyrotechs. And so in the morning, it's like, oh, well, and in the afternoon, it's blow stuff up, lose a hand.
What I appreciate about what you said is this core skill of yours, being able to be creative. Creativity has such application in so many contexts. I'm sure we're going to hear more about your own personal journey with creativity and how it served you well as we go through this.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that I believe everyone is creative. It's just they have different skills. It's a misnomer to focus on somebody who's doing creative out-of-the-box things and say, no, you're so creative and I'm not. Because I look at somebody who knits a quilt and I think, how in the world did they do that? To me, that's creative. I reject the idea that some people are creative and others are not. We all are talented. We just have different skills.
I so agree with that. Could you share a little bit about the approach you take for transforming training programs and perhaps share an example of how a client was able to apply your techniques to enhance employee performance?
Sure. Again, this is something that just happened to me. I got a call one day from Martin Lindstrom. He's an international branding guru. And he was working with a 100-store grocery chain in the Carolinas. And they wanted to make grocery shopping an experience. They wanted to Disneyfy it. And so they ended up on my doorstep. What I discovered was that I tend to get these organizations that are mom and pop companies that have grown into something bigger. But because they've been mom and pop companies, so for instance, 100 stores, Lowe's didn't even have a training department. I mean, that just astounds me. So what I found myself doing is reworking the cultures of these organizations. And I've done that successfully for 5 different companies now. Basically, what I do is I listen to what the company says and I distill it in a way that they never thought of, but is absolutely in step with what they really think.
What do you mean by reworking the cultures?
This health insurance company I worked with recently, and they were smart. They let me talk to over 50% of their employees. I mean, I had 2 weeks straight of meetings, and I'd ask the same question. What do you like about being here? What do you not like? And then I'd give them a sheet of paper and say, on a scale of 1 to 10, score whether you would recommend working here to someone else. And they all came in at 9s and 10s. And the things I heard about working here is it's like family. We're all friends. It's a community. I took that and distilled that into the neighborhood. And the word one was in their name already. So I said, we are one. And one stands for outstanding neighborhood experience. And then I took their 10 or 12 different behaviors that were expected and turned it into the neighborhood watch. It is my behavior. Let's say, I'm not sure I can say it. Remember these: welcoming, authentic, truthful, consistent, and humble. And rework the whole culture around the idea of the neighborhood. The key is it has to come from them, but synthesized through me. For Lowe's Foods, it took me months, and I finally came up with We Grow Community. We could be the team, could be the store, could be the company, could be the community that the store is in. Grow has learning and nutrition, and they would support local farmers. So growing and community was all the things I mentioned in We. And to this day, when you hear their CEO talk, he talks about the community.
Well, it is the holiday season, and your most recent book describes a trip you took to the North Pole. So tell us, Lenn, how did you end up in Santa's workshop?
Angelina was her name. She showed up at my door and said she had a celebrity couple that wanted to interview me. They'd read my Care Like a Mouse, which is my Disney Techniques inspired book. And I actually looked out the front door to see if they were out there because she said their time is precious and they haven't got a lot of time. Then she waved her hand like this. And the next thing you know, I'm standing in this gingerbread looking hallway with this short, rotund guy dressed in red velvet saying, ho, ho, ho. And I was at the North Pole. And that was Santa. He took me into his office, and his wife, Mary, Merri, promptly barged in. And it turned out that she had recommended the book to him, and he'd read Care Like a Mouse. So he wanted to show me around the workshop because he felt that some of the things in Care Like a Mouse copied what he did at the pole. And it's interesting. It came out, he mentioned a lot of people that have gone to the workshop, that I wasn't the first. And one of them that actually went there was Walt Disney. And they had an exchange of ideas. So it's not surprising to me that the Disney techniques are similar to the North Pole techniques. But he said something very interesting. He said Walt was so inspired by what he saw at the North Pole and Santa's workshop that he bought the land in Florida and he was going to create this city of tomorrow called Epcot. But he was sworn to secrecy. Nobody could know he went to the North Pole. And then sadly, he passed away before he could really make that city happen. So there's a theme park, which I worked in and love, but it's not what Walt had planned. The interesting thing is if he stayed at the North Pole, they seem to live forever. But then we would have been deprived of all his amazing contributions to the entertainment world.
Well, I thought when you said they were excited about the book, Care Like a Mouse, it was reminding Santa of his visit when no one was stirring, not even a mouse. But maybe that was the wrong connection. I want to hear about your visit, and I'm really curious about some of the lessons that you learned as you observed. I know your first one is be your best, share the rest.
Santa in his office, once Mary comes charging in, he makes the point that he could not do what he does without her, that he is, if you will, I hate to say figurehead because that implies less methodology than there is, but he's the guy everybody knows. They don't know Mary Claus. They know there's a Mrs. Claus, but they don't know much about her. But Santa is so busy being Santa that he can't really run the organization. And that's not his skill set. He's not a process guy. He's not even a service guy. He's an icon. Mary, on the other hand, is people, people, people. At one point later on in the book, as we walk through a wintergreen clubhouse, I say to her, don't all these elves coming up to you bother you? I asked her, don't they take away from your business? She said, no, the elves are my business. The point of that first lesson is many of us try to do everything ourselves, or try to be into things that we're not good at so we can get good at them. A better approach is to take what you do well and just do more and more and more of that and find others to do the things you don't know, you don't do well. Now, we've been talking about Disney, so I actually referenced Disney in the book because Walt was a creative, but he needed money. Roy, his brother, his older brother, was the guy who ran the company, took care of the people, and found the money. They used to joke that Roy's job was to find the money and Walt's job was to spend it faster than Roy could find it. But you all know Walt's name, like you all know Santa's name, but Santa couldn't exist without Mary and Walt couldn't have existed without Roy. So be your best, but share the rest is the lesson.
Yeah, getting those partnerships right is so difficult to find, leveraging team members' strengths, discovering them.
Yep.
It takes some humility on Santa's part, too, to recognize where he might have gap and need support from Mary or the elves or the reindeer or other. It seems like it really supports the purpose statement of Santa's workshop. And in your book, you list the purpose statement as we bring joy to the world. Yeah, what did you see in the workshop that kind of gave this idea of organizational focus and engaging different employees?
As I was alluding to with that health insurance company, purpose, and with Lowe's Foods, purpose is a lot of what I do. Once you have a pithy phrase that defines your company, you can really hone in because it's an emotional message. Walt Disney said, others use logic, we tap into emotion. Basically, they're missing the point. And everything about Santa is emotional, but it serves a logical purpose. But when you can, in 3 or 4 words, define what you're about in a purpose statement, then you can focus your entire organization on that purpose. Because, for instance, with a discussion with an employee, now, were you bringing joy to the world when you did that thing you just did? Is a marvelous way of focusing. And actually, the point was, we deliver joy. Now, I have something, it's a bit later on. I've actually got a piece of paper. I want to quote this to you. Great leaders make happy elves. Happy elves make happy toys. Happy toys make children happy. Happy children make parents happy. Happy parents help make the world a better place. We deliver joy to the world. That's where it comes from. It was striking when he took me into Holiday Hall. Holiday Hall's like the big gathering room, but it's also the connective room to all the different locations in the North Pole. So they've got these doors that tractor trailers and the like can go through, but the doors, you don't see them until they're needed. The pillars around the room are candy cane columns, and you pull a candy cane off and it grows right back. But anyhow, we walked into that room. He said, "Welcome to Holiday Hall." And then he said, "Ho, ho, ho, team, what's our purpose?" And they all hollered, "We deliver joy." And then how do we do that? And they all said, "Help." And what does help stand for? And they all shouted, "Happiness, excitement, love, and peace." And then Santa explained to me, when people feel four things, when they feel happy, when they feel excited, when they feel loved, and when they feel peace, we've delivered joy. And that's why we deliver Christmas presents. See, now there's a clarity about what I just said that absolutely defines what the organization is about and also what it's not about.
And not only that, it engages all the stakeholders in what you shared, all the stakeholders, from Santa to the elves to the children to us as parents. We're all engaged in that.
Right, we are. And let's talk a regular business. When you have a purpose statement and you're brave enough to share it with the world, you have to be careful. I think about that airline that had Fly the Friendly Skies, and then they dragged the guy off the plane. If you're going to promise something, if that's your purpose statement, you have to deliver it. I think for the longest time, Southwest was really good about that. And I would have made the argument then that Southwest Airlines actually, real thing is we connect people. Travel's how they do it, but they're really about connecting with people and connecting people to each other. When you are that clear, people want to work for you, companies want to invest in you, stockbrokers and the like, customers want to buy from you.
Very cool. So Lenn, where else did you visit at the North Pole?
Well, we went a lot of places. We went to the toy toolery. Now that's the factory. And I noticed that there were a lot of lines, but they weren't all running. And it turned out that toy manufacturers since the early 1900s have taken a lot of the toy development. I asked Santa, well, how do you control the toys then? And it turns out they have something called field elves. Now, I should say that elves are tall and thin and do not have pointy ears. They're originally from the Netherlands thousands of years ago. But because they never die, they don't age, they're still there. So there are some elves that are out in the field. So for instance, if a Santa in a department store is drunk, he's liable to have an assistant walk up to him and say, "Santa, you're drunk, you can't do that again." And that's usually a field elf, incognito. So these field elves are permeating the toy industry. As we may talk about later, there's a place called Nani Central. That's where all their computer stuff is. And if there's a bad toy, Nani Central has influencers that you think are just normal influencers, but they're actually elves working to be influencers, and they let everybody know this is not a good toy. So I asked them about Legos and parents stepping on Legos. Santa laughed and he said, "Oh, that's the parents' problem. We're not talking people out of Legos." But the toy toolery, they shared something else that is very interesting beyond purpose, and that is priorities. And the idea behind priorities, if you have a set of ranking priorities, people can, elves in this case, can make decisions based on those priorities. They do not have to get a manager for every situation that comes up. Because you see, some of these organizations, you're mad, you need help, and they say, "Well, let me get the manager." And you wait 20 minutes, and by the time that 20 minutes is up, you're really steaming. You are just so fit to be tied. Well, why couldn't the employee make the decision right there? The answer is they could. It's managers too tightly controlling. So priorities is something Disney's done. It's something I have all my clients do. That one company, the health insurance one, I'm not sure I can quote this off the top of my head, but their priorities were, is what I'm about to do ethical? Is it empathetic? Is it economical? And is it efficient? And when they can answer those four things, then they know they're good. So at the North Pole, what they said is, we want to deliver a smile. So the smile is it safe? Is it magical? Is it inclusive? Is it loving? And is it efficient? When what you're about to do is all those things, you can make a decision and be fully able to defend your decision. I think priorities is a place where many organizations miss the mark because, frankly, and this is something I deal with a lot of organizations, leaders trying too hard to take control of everything and then working themselves to exhaustion, wondering why they have to do everything themselves. Well, priorities is a way past that. Somebody makes a decision you don't like, you can say, what were you thinking? What priority were you using when they did that? Right. And you can re-educate, or you can coach, discipline, terminate, although not at the North Pole, or congratulate. But the point is you can have a conversation now about how it aligned with purpose and delivered on our priorities that we say are important.
Love the clarity on priorities. And I appreciate the fact that you said this isn't natural for most leaders. I would imagine in a place like the North Pole where you clearly have a hard deadline every year. I mean, you've got to be ready to go come December 24th. There would be a tendency in that environment for leaders to become a little bit more micromanagey. It's wonderful to hear that it's this clarity around priorities. And I also assume some trust between Santa and his elves that allows him to know that they're going to execute based on those priorities.
This brings me to another principle, be approached, not avoided. The idea is there are these leaders that when they walk into the room, everybody stiffens up, the conversation stops, they watch, they pretend they're not watching. And then there are other leaders where they're like, Mary Claus, I went through the Wintergreen Clubhouse, that's the elves hangout, with her, and she was inundated with elves, one after another, and it was a master class in how to handle people, although in this case, elves. Nobody wanted to avoid Mary. Everybody wanted to talk to her. And why? Because the elves were her business, and she made sure they knew that. There's one example in the book where this newly promoted elf comes up to her and says she has a problem. And the problem is with another manager who didn't get the job she wanted and got, who runs to purchasing of trucks. And this other manager's buying rundown trucks from the state of Florida and then repairing them. And the reason he's doing that is, one, they're cheaper, and two, he can funnel all the money into his team and the repairs, but she ends up with these broken down trucks. And Mary, rather than saying, I'll go talk to him, says, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you two to come to a meeting in my office, and we'll see if we can come up with a plan. And I want you to go talk to him and propose this meeting. And if he says no, let me know. So she didn't insert herself. Then there's another instance we're walking through. This one, Augusta, I think her name was. Hey, we're getting married next week. He says, now, you know, you and your husband, one of you will need to transfer. Do you have any idea who it'll be? And she says, well, I'm already his boss here. So I told him I'm going to be the boss at home. So he's probably going to transfer. The point is, she asked, but in a non-threatening way. I saw her pick up trash. I saw a vendor approach her. Interesting thing about the vendor, he looked older. When I asked her about it, he said he was an elf, but he opted out of the workshop. So once you do that, you age and you get the health issues and all that stuff. So there's real pressure to stay in the workshop.
The workshop keeps you young.
Now, you mentioned something a little earlier about December 24th.
Yes.
And I'm jumping ahead of you, but there is another lesson. You probably wanted to ask me about this. Is there really just one Santa?
We were going to ask you, is there really just one Santa?
And the truth is there's 21 of them.
Wow.
Here's why. Every country, well, many countries have their own Christmas traditions. So in Japan, Santa-san is the Santa, and fried chicken is the Christmas morning treat, Kentucky Fried Chicken in particular. Then you've got Aussie Claus.
I could go for fried chicken on Christmas morning.
Yeah, well, the Japanese do. You've got Aussie Claus, Australia. His troops like him because he goes for a walkabout all the time. And then you've got Father Christmas, who's the UK Claus, and he's very correct and proper. And you've got Befana, who's the Italian witch, and you've got the Yule lads who are very mischievous. And you have Krampus, who from Germany looks like a real beast. It's kind of like the Beauty and the Beast thing. He just looks really nasty, but he's really a teddy bear once you get to know him. So these guys are the chief territory officers because, you know, you would think it's impossible for one Santa to deliver all over the world in one night, and it is impossible. And some of these countries celebrate Christmas on December 6th, some on other days, some it's a New Year's thing. The original Santa said, I can't do all this myself. So he started appointing these CTOs, and they report to Mary, and Mary reports to Santa.
What's a CTO?
Chief Territory Officer.
Oh, got it. Okay. Good structure. So much more structure than I realized Santa had. I really thought he was kind of a one-man band until now.
Yeah, well, that's what that poem would suggest to you. You think about this, you'd have to have the skills of Amazon, Microsoft, Apple. You'd have to have horticulture, agriculture, housing, maintenance, vehicles, animal husbandry, medical. The list just goes on and on and on of the specialty. There's no company that could do all that.
There's an acronym POLE that allows Santa to outline his elf expectations. And as you write, that's really important because this is what allows him to let others steer, because he's already established a true north and he's able to get people to follow along with this POLE acronym. What are elf expectations? What's the POLE acronym? How does that help?
Let me say that I commented to them that they have way too many acronyms. And they said, well, you have to remember, we've been doing this since the 1800s.
It's like Santa was in the army almost. I mean, as many acronyms as we have in the military.
Yeah, really. Now, there are two acronyms we should talk about. One is the leadership. I am positive. We talk about finding true north. You hear that said in organizations. Well, they're at true north. So they came up with an acronym for POLE. And the acronym is positivity, ownership, logistics, and expertise. If you're a CTO or manager reporting to the CTO, you need to be a positive presence. You need to own your area. You need to handle the logistics like the guy with the trucks. They was not handling the logistics. And you need to be the expert. You can't just kind of pretend you know and you don't really know. So all the leaders are expected to be positive, have ownership, logistics, and expertise. And I attended a meeting with all these Santas, and it was really interesting. There was joviality, a lot of joking, semi-insults, but not really. Like at one point, the Yule lads threatened to play a trick on Belfana, and she said, and I'm a witch, you be careful, I might put a hex on you. But there was a camaraderie there that is missing often in organizations. These people really work together and we're very much in unison, like the elves I mentioned earlier in Holiday Hall. Very much a team without all the gamemanship. Now, whether that is because nobody really leaves, I don't know, but there is expansion. So, for instance, while I was there, they were expanding Santas, looking for new Santas to take over some of the African territories, because many countries in Africa have a small, Christian presence, but have their own Santa Clauses. So they were wrestling with that while I was there. Now, the elves have their own version of the POLE thing, and it is not an acronym. Finally, their job is to protect the magic, project positivity, perform their role, and partner effectively. Now, after the leaders all left the room, was the wrapping room is what it was appropriately called, the elves suddenly appeared there. And I double-checked what the leaders told me with what the elves said, and they were very much in concert. And when I told the elves asked what it was like in the real business world, and we're surprised to hear that people don't stay in a job for life. And when I told them that the average maybe 3 or 4 years, and then they either get fired or they moved on, they all gasped. That's unbelievable. I can't imagine that because the way they're treated and how things go. Now, I talked a lot, but I don't know if I answered your question.
I think so. I know Nolan was going to ask more about these elves. Go ahead, Nolan.
In the movies, I know that elves always seem incredibly happy. And when you ask them to describe the North Pole, they use words like family and friends. Why was that? And how do leaders create a similar culture within their organizations?
Okay, I wouldn't say they're incredibly happy.
They're not happy.
They're not unhappy. I would call them incredibly devoted and committed to the mission.
Which is more important than being happy. That's more important.
Yeah,
than being happy.
I might liken it a little to the military, where there might be some bitching behind the scenes, but everybody pulls together, and the guy in the foxhole next to you is a really important person to you. I didn't find any massive complaints, but I did find things that they wanted to improve. The strangest thing, when the big things are taken care of, people tend to focus on the small things. There's a refrain going through the books, the elves want ice cream. Somebody had taken ice cream off the menu in the Wintergreen Clubhouse. They're just over it. And several times in the book, they bring up the fact that we want ice cream. It's not that happy. And they're not short. And as I said, they don't have pointy ears. They're wistful. They look thin and pale and kind of sort of maybe not human, but definitely human. But I wouldn't say they're unhappy.
Okay.
I completely understand about the ice cream part. So I was in an organization and they removed tater tots from breakfast in the dining facility. And it was, you would have think like they just completely canceled breakfast every single day until they eventually brought tater tots back. So completely understand where those are coming from.
So I should also tell you about the North Pole. They have a movie theater. I don't have the name off the top of my head. I didn't have it prep for today, but they like to watch Christmas movies, particularly when the elves are depicted, because it makes them laugh. Like they love that film Buddy because they think it's so ridiculous that they just, oh, look at that. He's got pointy ears. Bowl Fill of Jelly is one of their favorite restaurants. Red Nose Tavern is their favorite drinking establishment. And I made a joke about tipsy elves. Henrik, who I was walking with, said, no, their favorite drink is eggnog.
Spiked or unspiked?
No, not spiked. They just like eggnog. In fact, the ice cream they end up getting is eggnog ice cream.
I was going to go with candy cane ice cream or...
No, they have candy canes.
Or gingerbread or something like that.
The walls are made out of gingerbread.
What a marvelous place.
In fact, interesting, a candy store opened and then closed because who's going to buy candy when you can get it for free on the job?
Real world
You
problems.
mentioned, that's really interesting. What's the most interesting place of all of these? What was the most interesting one you visited?
It was all pretty amazing. One place that I literally ran through because we had to get to Santa's office was a portrait gallery. They'd established this portrait gallery as the entrance to the North Pole, and then they found out that they didn't really get visitors, so they didn't use the entrance. But pictures of Santa all the way back from St. Nicholas 2,000 years ago, all the way up through Night Before Christmas, through the Nast diagrams, whatever you call those, in the 20s, to the poem, to Coca-Cola's ads, to the current look of Santa Claus. And of course, unfortunately, I had to rush through that gallery, so I didn't get to look too much at it. But that was a pretty fascinating place. And basically, the whole of it was fascinating. And as we get a little farther in, there's a place I want to tell you about that was the most fascinating of them.
Love to hear it. What was it?
Well, it was Nani Central.
What is Nani?
They kept talking about it. And, they wouldn't tell me what an acronym is. They would just say, wait, and you'll see. Nani is the naughty nice list. So the chief process officer, Blake, was in charge of Nani Central, and it looked like something very high tech. It almost looked like something you would see in NORAD with the U.S. military with the big screens. And Santa said, if you think process doesn't matter, ask a nice child put on the naughty list. So Santa was insistent. Now, Santa usually knows who's nice and who's naughty, but he was insistent that the naughty list be checked to make sure that kids on the list were actually naughty. And I said, well, how do you do that? Aren't there privacy concerns? And yes, this way, Nani Central was the only place that was kind of hidden and tucked away. The way the elves handle it is there's very heavy confidentiality agreements, and you really can be terminated for violating any of those. And with longevity, continual health, that's a strong incentive not to do anything. However, they've got to deal with the post office, so they get all the letters to Santa, and they have the assistants and sometimes the kids at department store Santa's knees taking notes or mental notes and then transcribing them later. And when parents boast about their kids on YouTube and other networks, they're monitoring those. And when a child sends a letter to Santa, and the post office delivers it to them, they take that as permission to verify what the child has said. Oh, it's really brilliant. And of course, the elves on the shelf and some of those technology things, they tap into that too. But they are really focused on making sure that process works. Also focused on a lot of other processes too.
Well, speaking of good and bad processes, can you share what you learned about Santa's roof run?
I bumped into somebody along the way, and that was Rudolph.
How is Rudolph?
Well, it was very strange. He had a high voice, like a female voice. Come to find out that Mary was there, so Mary helped with the explanation, so I know I got the true story. He's a she. Excuse me. Her name's not Rudolph. Her name is Ruby. When I asked her why she goes by Rudolph, she said, well, Ruby the red-nosed reindeer doesn't quite work. So Santa said, for instance, about Santa, they think I'm a big old fatso. I'm going to be a big old fatso. So, he bulked up once the images of Santa changed to that. He basically said, we have to put on a show and we have to be who we're expected to be. So Ruby became Rudolph. But Ruby doesn't have a bright red nose. She's female. She wears a ruby diamond on her nose. And that's where that red nose thing. And then Mary says, the song got it all wrong. I asked them, what did the song get wrong? They never let poor Rudolph join in any reindeer game. And I said, oh, you mean the name? She said, no, the reindeer games. It turned out that the reindeer were being very catty amongst themselves. Ruby was brought in to manage the reindeer. Reindeer didn't like her. They called her a bright noser. They refused should participate in anything Ruby set up, including the reindeer games. And then it reminded me of a situation at Disney where I was rewriting the Snow White training, and the new Snow White girls were doing so much better than the old Snow White girls. And we had a discussion about whether we should retrain all the older Snow Whites. We decided, no, it wasn't worth the money because those older Snow Whites were feeling pressure. So it's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. The reindeer were feeling pressure. Everybody was joining in the reindeer game except for the reindeer. And eventually they joined in too. But there was still some pessimism. Donner, which Donner's not her real name. It was something like Dietzen. I can't pronounce it as a German name. She really didn't like Donner because all the reindeer called her Downer, because she was a pessimistic, an Eeyore type, if you will. I suppose. They just didn't like her. Well, but Plackham listened to her when she complained about the roof run. You may have guessed by now, the roof run is Santa's delivery on Christmas Eve. Now you think about all the homes he has to go to, all the children. He has to know what presents. He has to reach into the bag, Santa was doing all that by himself, and the reindeer were bored silly. So Donner complained. They went to Santa, and he said, what happens if one year I can't do it? And Plackham realized they had a problem then. So they used a continuous improvement process to realize there's a problem, find a solution, test the solution, retest until you find something that works, and then put it in place. The end result is, here's what they did. Where Santa used to do everything himself, the reindeer are on headset now telling them what house to go to next. Santa has a computer printout telling them what house it is, how to get in. He reaches into the bag and the present comes up to him. He doesn't even have to worry about what the present is. He has time for a sip of hot cocoa between homes now. Furthermore, there is a sled. Doesn't look like Santa's sled, but one or two houses ahead of him where Santa's going to land next, clearing the way, making sure everything's okay. And there's another sled following Santa in case there's any issues, so they can intercede. This was all put into place because Downer complained. And not only did they do that, they actually do a roof run in October.
Like
they
a
do
rehearsal?
Yeah, it's a rehearsal. They run the whole thing, so they know exactly what they're doing in December. Well, more or less. I mean, some naughty kids might be removed from the naughty list by then. But yeah, they practice the whole thing. And they've got this down to a science. They've actually cut 10 minutes out of the roof run across America. And it was so successful that Canada Claus and Father Christmas and Aussie Claus and some of the others are adapting this and doing it themselves. And that's all because they listened to the complainer rather than just dismissing her as Downer. Downer was celebrated. They still call her Downer, but it's affectionate now.
I can tell, too, that you appreciate process matters more than product as much as Nolan and I do. It's a key thing we talk with our clients as well as our listeners. So critical to negotiations. And certainly as you talk about Santa's operation scaling, I don't know how he would do it without some good process management. What I appreciated too, and I just want to kind of shift gears here, is listening to Downer requires some emotional intelligence on Santa's part. It seems like the obvious example of emotional intelligence. I'm just curious what you observed about Santa himself in terms of him managing his emotions, and a leader listening today who wants to do the same. How would you encourage them?
Yeah, now let me tell you that Santa is a scarred soul. In my first visit with him, he was jolly old elf. In my second visit with him, I saw the real guy. And I mean, this is a guy that was imprisoned by a Roman emperor and tortured. He was the patron saint of children. Eventually, he was released when Constantine the Great became emperor. And with nothing else to do, he headed north. He said God told him to head north. And so he did, and he ended up as far north as possible. So he hides all that from his troops because he's not really, he doesn't want them to know any of that. But, it's hard not to let that show. And I'm looking here, I don't have it in front of me, but in the book, we talk about something that Dr. Carol Albrecht talked about, and that is finding your headspace. And he has an acronym for SPACE too. And the idea is to be not hung up in your past, but completely in the moment, hearing what's being said, enjoying what's being said, not being defensive when you are attacked, but listening, not letting someone else's emotions impact your own, and just staying centered. And for Santa, that's a pretty mean feat. And it was interesting. At the end of that conversation, I said to Santa, I have one question for you. Would you mind? I would really like to take a ride in your sleigh.
Of course. Who wouldn't?
Right. Who wouldn't? And at that moment, Joseph, his chief assistant, comes in and says, Santa, we got to go. And Santa looks, says, oh my God, it's time. And they have a end of the month celebration every month. They call the Santa Social. And we go back into Holiday Hall, which is now filled with people, and there's a riser, and Mary's up on the riser dancing around and just leading cheers, and there's screens flashing with different elves coming up, and people cheer elves will cheer when they see them. And then Santa hands me another candy cane, gives me a Santa hat. He comes up on the stage, but before he gets up on the stage, he puts me on a perch where I can see, and Krampus is up there. Remember, I said Krampus looks really nasty. And he says, okay, it's time to announce the winner of the Joy Card. And the Joy Card is their recognition program. And the interesting thing about the Joy Card is anyone at the poll can give a card to anyone else. It's not leader dependent. It's not, you have done well, young grasshopper, I will reward you. It's anyone rewards anyone. Now, if you're a frontline elf, you have to have your leader sign off on it. No awarding people because they wore red that day. So Krampus is up there, and he talks about this one elf that we met a couple times earlier in the book named Evie. And he says, I was doing an event with children, and this one little boy was so scared of me. Evie jumped in and made everything right. And eventually the boy touched my paw and we hugged. And so she was the Joy Card winner for the month. As part of being that winner, she won her choice of what to have in the cafeteria. And she said she wanted everybody to have ice cream, and it was going to be that ice cream. And everybody cheered. And then she also got a dinner for two at the Bowl of Jelly restaurant. And the last thing she got was a ride in Santa's sleigh. And Santa is looking straight at me as he's helping Evie into the sleigh. His thought comes into my head. And I think this is the real key point of the book. He says to me, I would have loved to have taken you for a ride in the sleigh, but it's something most of my elves never get to do. How could I give a one-day visitor a ride when I can't do it for my own people? Wow. You take care of the elves, they make great toys. The great toys make children happy, make parents happy, and make the world a better place. If you don't treat the elves right, the whole thing falls apart. So it's not about the leader and the elf getting them coffee. It's about the leader giving the elf coffee. In fact, the elves brag about one time they were all made to come in early, and all the Santas were in Holiday Hall cooking eggnog pancakes for them.
Delicious.
But it's that kind of point. But anyhow, so Evie gets in the sleigh. Hi-ho, let's go, or whatever it is Santa says. The sleigh starts to rise, and now I realize why I hadn't said this to you before, but it snows in the building. It just never lands. I realize there's no dome on the building, and he gets up to the top. Happy Christmas to all, and to all.
Good night.
And then the next thing you know, I'm on my couch, and I've got a transcript in my hand, a candy cane, and a Santa hat. This Santa hat. So was it real? I don't know, but if it wasn't real, I don't know where those things came from. But the one thing I learned was to be joyful.
Well, you talk with so much conviction, I have to imagine it was real.
It felt real.
Are you a believer?
Yes, I'm a believer in being joyful. Now, there's the Christian joy, which is of resurrection, and there's the general joy. I asked Santa this key question. Would you give presents to a child that wasn't a Christian child? And he said, yes, certainly. My goal is, I'm the patron saint of children, all children. The Christian joy is about giving to others. Santa's joy is about giving to others so they can give to others. So I think the two fit together. I have an essay in the book on how to give joy from a dear friend of mine, Howard Prager, who wrote a book about Make Someone's Day. And Howard is extremely Jewish, has some Christianity in it, but it's not a Christian book. It's a book about being a better you, taking care of the people around you, not getting out of your own skin, not thinking too much of yourself, rather giving to others so they can give still to others and appreciate the joy. So I asked Santa, how he felt about the commercialization of Christmas. He said, well, he doesn't like it very much, but anything that makes Christmas last longer, he's in favor of. I found Santa. I can't say if he's real or not. What I can say is he's in my heart.
As we get ready to wrap up, we'd like to invite you to offer a final thought, given your time at the North Pole and your years at Disney. What key takeaways would you offer listeners seeking to create magic in their organizations?
I would say stick to the knitting. What I mean by that is Disney currently is, you may have noticed, in all sorts of pickles because there's a question of who they represent in the movies and how they represent. And their films haven't done that well. It's because half their audience has fled. They've picked up another half of the audience, but there's no reason they can't have the whole audience. As an entertainer, one of the things that I think is there's great validity in politics and political position. There's also great validity in entertaining people. And the two of them don't have to be mixed. I devoted my life to entertaining. I figure people have enough troubles without me getting into any sort of opinions I might have about anything that's going on in the world. And the whole idea of giving joy is really about appreciating people and not getting hung up in tit for tat and spats on Facebook and other entities. Just enjoy the life you've got, because unlike those elves, we get old. Let's enjoy what we have. One other thing I would like to say, my success has come from spotting the doors and walking through them. You never get ahead when you say no. So if you see an opportunity, even if you're afraid, the difference between creatives and non-creatives is creatives see opportunity, non-creatives see danger. So if a door opens for you, say yes, because your world will change. You'll look back on it and say, I can't imagine it would have been if I hadn't done that. For me, I can't imagine what life would be like if I hadn't visited the North Pole, and I'll be forever thankful for it.
Well, that's a nice message as we get ready to wrap up not only the program, but 2024. So thank you for sharing your stories, sharing some joy. And folks, if you are listening, it's called the Santa System. And I know Lenn is saying there's still time to order that and get it into stockings before Christmas. Please look at it.
You can find it at Amazon and on my website.
Lenn, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. As you can tell, I get all excited talking about Santa and what I witnessed. And I wish everybody could witness the same. And maybe your New Year's resolution is to provide joy to the people around you.
Awesome. Well, that is it for us on today's podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the Ghost Podcast if you haven't already. And also, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everybody.